Um, Imagine finding a 3-foot medieval sword lying on the floor of a modern crime scene.
Right, and not just as some bizarre background detail, but as the actual murder weapon.
Yeah, completely covered in blood.
Mm.
And now add to that a deeply enmeshed love triangle involving childhood friends.
Which is already a powder keg.
Exactly. But then you get claims of multiple personalities taking over a suspect's body.
And a supposed secret vigilante society called Ghost.
Yes, ghost. And finally, a digital footprint that exposes someone acting as a deadly puppet master from just a few feet away.
I mean, it really sounds like a script for a psychological thriller, but it is the grim, just completely uncompromising reality of what investigators faced in Santa Fe, New Mexico in October of 2022.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for you today is to walk straight into the center of this horrific, highly anomalous crime.
We really need to look closely at the evidence.
Right, we aren't going to get sidetracked by sociological theories or, outside noise. We are going to strictly examine the physical evidence, the brutal forensic reality of that sword, and the deeply unsettling backgrounds of the people involved.
Because we want to understand the exact mechanics of how a human being is essentially weaponized by another human being.
Right, and that requires us to look at the anatomy of manipulation. The physical act of violence in this case is undeniable. But the psychological architecture that built up to that swing of the sword, that's where the standard playbook of criminal behavior just gets completely thrown out the window.
It really does. It defies all the normal expectations.
But rather than jumping straight into the blood and the chaos of the crime scene itself, I think we have to start with the reality of what was lost. If you're listening to this, I want you to picture a 21-year-old woman named Grace Jennings.
And it is crucial we emphasize her age, 21.
Yeah.
Because in the chaotic, immediate aftermath of the crime, the narrative surrounding Grace was already being inadvertently distorted.
Yes. If you followed the early media reports on this case, or if you ever pulled up the initial police criminal complaints, you probably saw her age erroneously reported as 19.
Which happens more often than people realize.
And I want to pause on that for a second. I mean, how does a victim's age get universally misreported in official documents right out of the gate?
Well, it comes down to the fog of war in those first 24 hours of a homicide investigation.
Right.
When law enforcement arrives at a chaotic scene, especially one as gruesome as this, their primary focus is containment. They are securing evidence, identifying suspects, that sort of thing.
Just locking it down.
Exactly. So victim identification relies on whoever is present or whatever documentation happens to be immediately accessible. Sometimes it's a panicked statement from a suspect or, sometimes it's an outdated ID card found in a wallet.
Ah, I see.
Once that initial incorrect detail gets typed into a preliminary criminal complaint, it just becomes a matter of public record.
And then the media gets a hold of that public record, and suddenly every headline is mourning a 19-year-old.
Which is an incredibly painful secondary trauma for a grieving family.
I can't even imagine.
They are not only dealing with the sudden, violent loss of their loved one, but they are suddenly forced into a position of having to correct the public record.
Oh.
They have to advocate for the basic truth of who she was while simultaneously planning her funeral.
That is just awful.
It was eventually corrected by judicial filings and her family's obituaries, but it really highlights how quickly a victim can lose control of their own story the moment a crime occurs.
Right. She had her Aunt Kate, Uncle Brian, and her 3 cousins, Ava, Noah, and Kyla. We are listing these names intentionally because when we get into the dark psychology of the suspects, it is just too easy to forget the network of love that was permanently severed.
The tragedy doesn't happen in a vacuum, it happens in a community.
And you really see that community impact in how Santa Fe responded. They mobilized almost immediately.
They really stepped up.
There was a memorial fund set up called Grace Happens to help cover the funeral arrangements and to support Roma and Arlo. Her final services were handled through the Rivera family funeral home in New Mexico.
Right.
The community had to step in to help this family physically and financially navigate the aftermath of an absolute nightmare.
But, to understand how Grace ended up in that nightmare, we have to examine the specific environment she walked into.
The garage.
Yes. We have to map out the interpersonal matrix because the living situation she entered was practically designed to obscure her humanity and turn her into a target.
So let's build this environment for everyone listening. The space where Grace lost her life. We need to introduce Kiara McCulley, who was 19 years old at the time, and Isaac Apodaca, who was 25.
They were a couple.
Right. They were a couple, and they were cohabiting. But it's where they were living that I find so structurally significant. They were living together in a detached garage that belonged to Macaulay's mother.
A detached garage. Think about the psychological implications of that physical space for a moment. It's a closed system.
It's essentially an island on someone else's property.
Precisely. It is physically separated from the main house, meaning it lacks the natural interruptions of a shared living space. No one is casually walking through to get to the kitchen.
Right, there's no random foot traffic.
It is isolated, enclosed, and unregulated. In cases of psychological manipulation or coercive control, the first thing an abuser seeks is isolation.
And this building basically does that work for them.
Exactly. A detached garage is an architectural manifestation of that isolation. It creates an echo chamber where reality is dictated solely by the people inside it, without any external reality checks.
And the reality inside that garage was already incredibly convoluted before Grace ever stepped foot in it that weekend.
Highly convoluted.
Let's map this relationship history, because it is a tangled, messy web. All three of these individuals, Grace, Kiara, and Isaac, had previously engaged in romantic relationships with one another.
It is a closed loop of romantic and emotional history.
But it goes deeper than just former partners. Kiara Macaulay and Grace Jennings were childhood friends.
And that is the detail that elevates this from a tragic crime of passion to a profound, intimate betrayal.
How so? Walk us through the psychology of that, because, betraying an acquaintance is one thing, but betraying someone you grew up with requires a different level of psychological override, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. When you have a childhood friend, you share a foundational history. You know their family, you know their vulnerabilities, their fears, their habits. You have a built-in reservoir of trust.
You've known them your whole life, basically.
Exactly. For Macaulay to eventually cross the line into lethal violence against Grace, she couldn't just be angry at her. She had to undergo a process of profound dehumanization.
Wow. Dehumanization.
Yes. She had to systematically strip away decades of shared humanity until Grace was no longer my childhood friend, but merely an obstacle or a threat. And that kind of dehumanization rarely happens spontaneously. It requires cultivation.
Which brings us to the catalyst, the inciting incident. So you have Kiara and Isaac living in this isolated, detached garage echo chamber. They are in an exclusive relationship. And then on Friday, October 28, 2022, Isaac Apodaca does something that seems entirely counterintuitive.
He invites her over.
Right. He invites Grace Jennings to come over and spend the night with him in the garage.
And this is the moment the atmospheric pressure in that room shifts from uncomfortable to highly dangerous.
I mean, put yourself in that detached garage for a second. Think about mixing volatile chemicals in an unventilated space.
That's a great way to put it.
You have a confined, single-room environment. You have three people who all have romantic history with each other. You have two childhood friends, one of whom Macaulay is known to harbor intense, volatile jealousy regarding the other.
Yes, intense jealousy.
Given all of that, why on earth would Apodaca bring Jennings into that confined space? I struggle to buy that this was just a casual, oblivious invitation. Was it a complete lack of awareness, or was it something deliberate?
Well, if we look closely at the behavioral patterns of individuals who exude coercive control, we can confidently reject the idea that this was a mere oversight.
So it wasn't just a bad idea.
It wasn't a clumsy mistake at all. It was a calculated provocation.
So he knew exactly what he was doing by inviting her.
He is introducing a known, highly combustible stressor into an environment where he holds the spatial and emotional power.
Yeah.
By bringing Grace into the garage, he destabilizes Macaulay, triggering her deepest insecurities and jealousies. Simultaneously, he isolates Grace in a space where she is outnumbered and totally out of her element. And where does that leave Apodaca?
It positions him right in the center. He becomes the focal point of the whole room.
Exactly. He positions himself as the central figure around whom this entire emotional storm revolves. Both women are now reacting to his choices, operating in his territory.
That's so manipulative.
It is a dynamic of intense emotional friction, and he is the one controlling the thermostat.
He's essentially conducting a sick psychological pressure test. He lights a match, tosses it onto the floorboards of this garage, and just sits back to watch the fire spread.
And the fire absolutely consumed that space.
Because the tension that incubated in that garage overnight violently ruptured the very next morning.
The transition from the invisible psychological tension we've been discussing to the undeniable physical devastation of the crime scene is jarring.
It's horrifying. Saturday morning, October 29, 2022, Santa Fe police officers are dispatched to the residence. And the scene they encounter upon pulling up is immediate, high-decibel
Yeah,
chaos.
total chaos.
Before they even get out of their cruisers, they witness Kiara McCauley actively fleeing from the detached garage.
Which is the ultimate red flag for an arriving officer.
Oh,
When you are dispatched to a disturbance and someone is actively sprinting away from a structure, the threat assessment immediately spikes.
they know something awful just happened.
The logic is simple. Whatever is inside that building is terrifying enough to provoke a desperate flight response. It signals to the officers that the situation has already escalated beyond an argument. They're entering a catastrophe.
So officers breach the detached garage, and what they find inside defies every standard expectation of a modern domestic crime scene.
It's just unthinkable.
Grace Jennings' body is lying on the floor, and right alongside her is the murder weapon. It is a 3-foot metal sword, completely coated in her blood.
We really need to pause and analyze the choice of that weapon. Because in forensic psychology, the murder weapon is a profound indicator of the relationship between the attacker and the victim.
Right, it tells a story.
And it reveals the psychological state of the attacker during the crime.
Because a 3-foot sword is not something you just happen to have in your pocket. It's an incredibly deliberate, almost theatrical tool of violence.
It is deeply intimate and highly physical. Consider the biomechanics of using a sword compared to, say, a firearm.
Okay.
A firearm allows for distance. It allows for psychological detachment. You pull a trigger from across a room, and the mechanics of the gun do the work.
You don't have to get your hands dirty, so to speak.
Exactly. But a 3-foot sword requires extreme physical exertion. It requires proximity. You have to be close enough to your victim to feel the resistance of their body, to be covered in the physical evidence of the act.
Oh, that's dark.
It is driven by an extreme, visceral, almost primitive rage.
And the medical examiner's report paints a picture of that exact primitive rage. The trauma inflicted on Grace was not a single unfortunate strike. It was a sustained obliteration.
It was incredibly brutal.
We are talking about multiple deep slashes across her body, deep stab wounds, a partially severed ear. And most horrifyingly, the medical examiner documented clear structural indicators of a deliberate attempt at decapitation.
An attempted decapitation takes this crime out of the realm of simply silencing a victim or neutralizing a threat. It is an act of total symbolic erasure.
Erasure. Explain that distinction. Why does the specific act of targeting the neck to that extreme degree matter psychologically?
Because the head and the face are the seat of identity. It is where we communicate, where we recognize each other.
Right.
To attempt to sever the head is an attempt to completely destroy the person's identity. It speaks to a deep-seated, simmering hatred.
So it wasn't just about killing her.
No, the attacker didn't just want Grace dead. The attacker wanted to completely unmake her. It is the physical manifestation of the dehumanization process we discussed earlier.
So you have this staggering forensic reality. A garage floor slick with blood, a 3-foot sword, the unspeakable trauma to Grace's body. The physical evidence is screaming the truth of what happened.
It's undeniable.
But then you watch the police body cam footage of the suspects in the immediate aftermath, and it feels like you are watching two people living in an alternate reality.
This is a critical window into the minds of perpetrators. How do they behave in those first few minutes when the adrenaline is crashing and the authority figures have arrived?
It's wild because both of them start spinning these absurd narratives. Isaac Apodaca's immediate response on camera is pure reflexive deflection.
Immediate deflection.
He looks at the officers and claims he had simply walked into the garage, found Grace Jennings dead on the floor, and that Kiara McCauley just turned to him and bluntly stated, "I did it."
Yeah?
He is trying to cast himself as the innocent roommate who just happened to stumble into a horror movie.
He is deploying instantaneous self-preservation through immediate blame shifting. He offers McCauley up without a second thought to insulate himself.
But I don't understand how his brain even processes that as a viable strategy. Put yourself in the shoes of those officers.
It's baffling.
You are looking at a 3-foot bloody sword. You are looking at an attempted decapitation in a tiny, enclosed, detached garage. How could Apodaca possibly think that casually passing the blame and playing the ignorant bystander would hold up for even 10 seconds against that level of physical evidence?
He's not thinking clearly.
You don't just, stumble upon a medieval slaying in a single-room garage and not know what happened. The smell alone, the sheer volume of blood, it's impossible to ignore.
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism of cognitive dissonance in the immediate wake of extreme trauma. You are assuming that Apodaca is processing the scene logically, like an investigator. He is not.
He's just in survival mode.
Exactly. Extreme trauma scenes, even for the perpetrators who caused them, prompt crude, primitive survival instincts. The brain is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline.
Fight or flight.
In that moment, Apodaca isn't thinking about blood spatter patterns or the auditory impossibility of sleeping through a sword attack or the forensic timeline. His brain is simply screaming, "Escape the threat!"
And the cops are the threat.
Yes, the immediate threat is the police officer standing in front of him. So he deploys an absurd, almost childlike defense strategy. It's a reflexive lie. He will say whatever he thinks will get him through the next 5 minutes, completely failing to realize that the undeniable forensic reality surrounding him has already trapped him.
It reminds me of a child standing next to a shattered window with a baseball in their hand, pointing at the dog and saying, "The dog threw it." Except the shattered window is a 21-year-old woman's life, and the baseball is a sword.
It is a crude, surface-level scramble. But as we move from the chaotic crime scene to the sterile environment of the police interview rooms, the adrenaline wears off.
The reality sets in.
The reality of the arrest sets in. And the psychological defenses that these two suspects deploy evolve from crude deflections into something infinitely more complex and far more disturbing.
Yes, the post-arrest interrogations. This is where the physical brutality of the crime scene gives way to the psychological labyrinth. We know what happened in that garage. Now investigators are trying to extract the why.
And the why is rooted in severe psychopathology and a deeply corrupted interpersonal dynamic that had been festering long before that weekend.
Let's start by looking at Kiara McCauley in that interview room. After her initial attempts to evade, the dam breaks and she starts talking.
She confesses.
Right. She admits to investigators that she was deeply, fiercely angry about Isaac inviting Grace over. But it wasn't just a sudden flare-up of jealousy that night. McCauley confesses something terrifying.
The dreams.
Yeah, she admits to having long-standing recurring dreams of torturing, screaming at, and murdering Grace Jennings.
That is a highly significant admission. It indicates that the violence was not entirely spontaneous.
It was building up.
The ideation, the specific fantasy of inflicting profound physical harm on this specific victim had been incubating in McCauley's mind for an extended period. The sword attack wasn't a sudden break from reality. It was the physical actualization of a pre-existing psychological script she had been running in her head.
But here is where her defense mechanism becomes truly extreme. Even as she admits to these dark, violent fantasies, she desperately tries to distance herself from the actual physical murder.
Right.
She tells the detectives that she suffers from dissociative identity disorder, what most people still colloquially refer to as multiple personalities. Right. She claims she has complete amnesia of the slaying itself. Her defense is that an alternate personality completely took over her body, picked up the sword, and committed the murder while the real Kiara was essentially blacked out.
Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is one of the most complex, controversial, and heavily scrutinized diagnoses in both psychiatry and forensic psychology.
Because it's so hard to prove.
Exactly. In the context of a criminal defense, claiming that an alter committed the crime and therefore the host personality is not culpable is a desperate attempt to sever the legal and moral link between intention and action.
She is basically saying, my hands held the sword, but I wasn't in the driver's seat. How does the legal system even begin to parse that? Do juries buy it?
Very rarely. The forensic challenge with DD is distinguishing between genuine trauma-induced dissociation and malingering.
Malingering.
Which is the intentional faking of symptoms for secondary gain, like avoiding a murder conviction. Forensic psychologists have to conduct exhaustive evaluations to determine if the amnesia is real or if it is a convenient narrative constructed after the fact to avoid accountability.
That makes sense.
But regardless of whether her dissociation was genuine or manufactured, it reveals a profound fragmentation of responsibility. She is fundamentally incapable of owning her actions.
But we cannot look at McCauley's fragile mental state, these violent dreams, this claimed fragmentation of her identity in a vacuum. She wasn't alone in that garage.
No, she wasn't.
To understand how her dark fantasies were weaponized into reality, we have to look at the man she was sharing that space with, Isaac Apodaca, because their profiles are polar opposites.
This is where the true architecture of this crime begins to reveal itself. We move from the volatile instrument to the steady hand that guided it.
Isaac Apodaca is not a blank slate. He is not just a guy who got caught in a bad situation. He brought a documented violent criminal record into that garage.
Yes, his history is very telling.
Prior to this night, Apodaca had faced charges for aggravated battery and unlawful imprisonment.
We need to analyze those specific charges carefully. Aggravated battery and unlawful imprisonment. Those aren't just bar fights or random acts of aggression.
Right, it's a specific kind of violence.
They indicate a highly specific, targeted type of violence. Unlawful imprisonment is about restricting a person's freedom of movement. It is the ultimate act of physical isolation. Aggravated battery is about establishing physical dominance and inflicting fear.
So together, those charges paint a documented history of someone who uses coercive control, physical dominance, and isolation against romantic partners.
Precisely. It establishes a behavioral baseline. This is a man who understands how to trap someone and how to hurt them to maintain control.
Now, combine those two profiles. You have a 25-year-old man with a history of locking down and battering partners, and he is cohabiting in an isolated, detached garage with a 19-year-old woman who is experiencing violent fantasies, intense jealousy, and who claims her mind splinters into different personalities under stress.
It's a recipe for disaster.
The power imbalance there is staggering.
It is the perfect dark ecosystem for manipulation. A psychopathic dominant personality requires a vulnerable, subordinate partner to exert control over. Macaulay's psychological fragility wasn't a burden to Apodaca, it was an asset. It was raw material he could mold.
And the terrifying depth of how he molded her becomes apparent when we get to the most bizarre aspect of the post-Miranda disclosures. Because beyond the claims of multiple personalities, Macaulay reveals something else to the detectives.
The secret society.
Something that sounds like it belongs in a comic book, not a homicide investigation. She reveals a massive shared delusion. She tells investigators that she firmly believed Isaac Apodaca was a high-ranking member of a shadowy, secret vigilante organization called Ghost.
Ghost. This introduces a highly complex delusional system into the motive structure. It is no longer just about interpersonal jealousy. It has been elevated into a bizarre, fictionalized crusade.
She claimed that Apodaca was actively receiving instructions from the secret society. And most importantly, she believed that Ghost had specifically ordered the execution of Grace Jennings.
Wow.
In Macaulay's mind, Isaac wasn't just her boyfriend. He was passing down binding, lethal orders from this phantom organization.
This is a classic, albeit extreme and lethal, presentation of what psychiatry calls folie à deux, or shared delusional disorder.
Foolsy do.
Yes. It is a psychiatric syndrome in which symptoms of a delusional belief are essentially transmitted from one individual to another.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think of the human mind like a computer network. A folie à deux operates almost exactly like a computer virus.
I like that analogy.
It's like Apodaca coded a corrupted operating system, this ghost narrative, and he needed to install it into Macaulay's mind. But you can't just install a virus. You need a vulnerability. You need a backdoor.
Right.
And Apodaca used her existing vulnerabilities, her intense jealousy of Grace, her dissociative tendencies, and her deep-seated fear of his violent history as the backdoor to get the ghost virus in.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy for the mechanics of coercive control. The structure of a folie à deux typically requires a dominant primary case, the inducer.
The emitter, okay.
In this scenario, that is Apodaca. He creates and enforces the delusion of the ghost society. He leverages his known, documented history of violence to enforce compliance. Macaulay knows what he's capable of physically, which lends terrifying credibility to his claims of being a vigilante.
But why create the ghost society at all? Why not just tell her to kill Grace himself?
Because the fictional organization allows him to outsource the ultimate moral and authoritative responsibility.
Oh, so he can wash his hands of it.
It wasn't Isaac demanding the execution, it was Ghost. He acts merely as the conduit, the messenger. It systematically exploits the subordinate partner's fragile grasp on reality. He takes her pre-existing violent dreams about Grace, and instead of telling her they are wrong, he validates them.
He feeds them.
He tells her those dreams are actually a mandate from a higher power. He weaponizes her own psychology to act on his behalf.
He builds an entire self-contained alternate reality inside that detached garage. He controls the information, he controls the physical space, and he dictates the rules of this phantom society. It really is a dark masterclass in psychological manipulation.
It is. But here is the critical pivot in this case.
Yeah.
While psychology provides the why, it explains the twisted ecosystem that allowed this delusion to flourish, psychology alone is very rarely enough to secure a conviction in a courtroom.
Jurors need more than that.
A jury needs more than theories on shared delusions, induced psychosis, and dissociative states. They need hard, tangible facts. The prosecution needed concrete proof of the how.
Right, because look at the board. If Kiara McCauley is sitting there saying, my alternate personality committed the murder on orders from a secret ghost society, and Isaac Apodaca is sitting in the next room saying, I was just a sleepy bystander who walked in after the fact, you have a massive he said, she said scenario.
It's a mess.
And the entire scenario is clouded by severe, documented mental illness and absurd claims. If you are a prosecutor, how do you prove who is actually responsible for swinging that sword?
You prove it by ignoring the noise and looking at the one entity in that garage that doesn't hallucinate, doesn't dissociate, doesn't suffer from multiple personalities, and doesn't lie.
The digital footprint. Which brings us to the absolute turning point of this entire investigation, the digital forensics.
This is where the theoretical, invisible strings of manipulation we've been discussing suddenly become visible, tangible, unalterable evidence.
Investigators seize the smartphones belonging to both suspects, and they extract the data. And what the digital forensics team finds are text message logs exchanged between Isaac Apodaca and Kiara McCauley.
The timing is everything here.
Exactly. But it is the timing of these texts that elevates this from a tragedy to a cold-blooded conspiracy. These texts are sent in real time, in the dark, while Grace Jennings is asleep in that very same garage.
I want you to truly imagine the geography of that environment. The physical proximity is chilling.
Yeah, they're in the same room.
You have a single-room detached garage. The victim is asleep. She is completely vulnerable, entirely unaware of the danger she is in. And silently, through digital keystrokes traversing the airwaves across the room, her brutal execution is being meticulously orchestrated.
These texts are the smoking gun. They are indisputable. They show active real-time coordination and premeditation.
They destroy the amnesia defense.
This digital evidence instantly vaporizes McCauley's defense that she was in a sudden, amnesiac, dissociative state where she had no idea what was happening. You can't actively text your boyfriend about a murder plot while supposedly blacked out in an alternate personality.
No, you can't.
And more importantly, it completely annihilates Apodaca's claim that he was just an innocent, ignorant bystander who walked in after the deed was done. The digital logs prove they were communicating about the kill while the weapon was being prepared.
The digital footprint acts as the ultimate anchor to objective reality. It cuts straight through the fog of the ghost delusion and the psychiatric claims. It provides a time-stamped, irrefutable record of intent, awareness, and conspiracy.
So the detectives take these extracted text logs back into the interview room. They sit down across from Isaac Apodaca, who's been playing the innocent victim of circumstance, and they put the printouts on the table.
The moment of truth.
They say, you told us you had absolutely nothing to do with this, but we have texts right here, from your phone to her phone, coordinating the murder while Grace slept. And Apodaca's response, his minimization strategy, when confronted with cold, hard proof, is just mind-boggling.
It is, but it is also highly characteristic of perpetrators of coercive control.
Really? How so?
They become so accustomed to their manipulation, working on their victims in private, that they arrogantly believe they can simply talk their way out of anything. Even when confronted by law enforcement with objective facts, they believe their own spin.
Apodaca looks at the texts and claims that McCauley was still the sole architect and planner of the murder. He tells the investigators that he was only replying to her messages in correspondence because I wanted to sleep.
He attempts to frame his active digital participation in a premeditated murder conspiracy as merely an attempt to placate an annoying roommate so he could get some rest.
It's insane.
It is a stunning display of minimization and lack of empathy.
So what does this all mean? If you break down his logic, he's essentially arguing to the police, yes, I helped plan a brutal medieval sword murder of my former partner, but I only did it so my current girlfriend would stop texting me and I could get some shut-eye.
Right.
How does any defense attorney even begin to construct a narrative around that level of digital proof and that absurd of an excuse?
They cannot. It is legally and logically indefensible. And forensic analysts and the police easily dismantled this pathetic defense strategy because they didn't just have the timestamps proving he was awake and communicating. They had the actual content of the messages.
Right, he wasn't just texting back K or leave me alone.
Exactly. The content of his messages directly corroborated McCauley's later post-Miranda statements about Apodaca commanding the execution. The language he used, the direction he provided, The coordination evident in those texts proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was the architect.
He was running the show.
He wasn't passively nodding along to get some sleep. He was actively managing the escalation of violence.
It represents a terrifying evolution in how we have to view his criminal profile. We talked earlier about his prior criminal history, the aggravated battery, the unlawful imprisonment. Those were crimes of direct, hands-on physical violence. He used his own body to trap and hurt people.
But not this time.
But here, inside that garage, we see Apodaca transition into a highly sophisticated, insidious form of psychological proxy control. He learns to keep himself physically detached from the weapon. He makes sure he doesn't hold the sword. He orchestrates the murder digitally, leveraging her delusions, acting entirely as the puppet master.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of modern criminal justice, this exact scenario is why digital texts are radically revolutionizing domestic abuse and coercion cases.
That makes a lot of sense.
Historically, emotional abuse, psychological manipulation, and coercive control were incredibly difficult crimes for a prosecutor to prove because they almost exclusively occurred behind closed doors. The abuse was atmospheric.
It's hard to put handcuffs on an atmosphere.
It was always one person's traumatized word against their abuser's calm denial. Juries struggle with he said, she said, when there are no bruises to show. But now, abusers are carrying devices in their pockets that create a permanent, unalterable, objective record of their manipulation.
Those texts.
The invisible strings of control, the daily psychological conditioning, they are now extractable data points that can be blown up on a screen and presented to a jury.
He really thought he was insulating himself. He thought that by making her do the physical act, by making sure she was the one covered in blood, he was legal untouchable. He thought that because he didn't physically swing the sword, he couldn't be called a murderer.
He was wrong.
But those text messages, those digital keystrokes, tied his hands to the hilt of that weapon just as firmly as if they'd found his own fingerprints in Grace's blood.
And that transition moving from the cement solid digital evidence to how the justice system actually processes and penalizes these two very different but equally guilty individuals is where the final chapter of this tragedy unfolds. We have to look at the legal accountability.
Right. Because you have two co-defendants entering the legal system. One who physically held the sword under layers of induced delusion and trauma, and one who held the smartphone, comfortably pulling the strings from the shadows. And the legal paths these two take diverge dramatically as we move between the years 2025 and 2026.
It's a classic dynamic in conspiracy cases. When co-defendants are faced with overwhelming, undeniable evidence, especially digital evidence, that implicates them both simultaneously, the alliance inevitably collapses.
It's every man for himself.
The united front shatters. It rapidly devolves into a prisoner's dilemma, a race to see who can cooperate with the state and secure a plea deal first to save themselves.
And that total breakdown of their shared defense happened officially in February of 2025. Kiara McCulley, the 19-year-old who physically committed the slaying, broke first. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder.
And crucially, she flipped.
And crucially, as the linchpin of her plea agreement, she agreed to fully cooperate and testify against Isaac Apodaca.
Which, from a strategic standpoint, is the ultimate goal for the prosecution team. They secure a guaranteed conviction on the physical perpetrator, eliminating the risk of a trial where a jury might be swayed by complex psychiatric defenses, like D-Day.
Right, take away the wild card.
And simultaneously, they gain the insider key witness needed to contextualize the digital evidence against the conspirator. They need McCulley on the stand to explain exactly what those texts meant in the context of the ghost delusion.
But even with her cooperation, the sentence she received is highly significant. The judge did not let her off lightly just because she was manipulated. Kiara McCulley was sentenced to 30 years in prison.
That is a massive sentence.
Now, to put that in perspective for you, in the state of New Mexico, the standard maximum penalty for second-degree murder is typically 15 years. She received double the maximum penalty.
A double-length sentence is an exceptional judicial outcome. Judges do not hand down sentences like that lightly. It indicates that the court found severe aggravating factors that push the reality of the crime far beyond the standard legal definition of the charge.
And the prosecution fought for and secured that 30-year sentence by explicitly highlighting the extreme, undeniable physical brutality of the crime scene.
The sword.
They pointed to the choice of the 3-foot sword. They pointed to the multiple deep stab wounds, and specifically they pointed to the attempted decapitation. The argument was that even with her claims of dissociation, even with her willingness to cooperate against Apodaca, the physical reality of what she chose to do to Grace Jennings demanded a severe, uncompromising penalty.
The law must balance the context of manipulation with the reality of the action. The quote recognizes that while McCulley may have been psychologically groomed and manipulated by Apodaca, she was still the physical instrument of death.
She swung the sword.
She chose to pick up the weapon. 30 years in a penitentiary reflects the absolute finality and brutality of her actions.
So McCulley is serving 3 decades. The physical act has been accounted for. That leaves Isaac Apodaca. And his journey through the legal system has been incredibly volatile. If McCulley finally accepted reality, Apodaca has been fighting it every step of the way. His courtroom tactics have been erratic, to say the least.
Which, again, aligns perfectly with the behavioral profile we discussed earlier. This is a man used to being entirely in control of his environment and the people in it.
And now he has no control.
Suddenly, he finds himself stripped of his power, locked in a cell, entirely at the mercy of the state's timeline and rules. That loss of control often manifests as erratic, combative behavior in legal proceedings.
At one point, it seemed like it was over.
Mm-hmm.
Apodaca actually signed a plea agreement with the state. The ink was dry. It looked like he was going to take a deal and avoid a trial.
But then
there's this incredibly dramatic court hearing. His defense attorney stands up in front of the judge, takes the signed plea document, and literally rips it up right there in the open courtroom. He states for the record that Apodaca has changed his mind. He no longer wishes to accept the state's offer, and he arrogantly wants to take his chances at trial.
ripping up a signed plea agreement in open court is highly theatrical, but it is also an extraordinarily risky legal gamble. It signals a defendant who is either deeply in denial about the insurmountable strength of the evidence against him, specifically those time-stamped text messages, or it signals someone suffering from extreme hubris.
He thinks he's smarter than everyone else.
A manipulator who still genuinely believes he is smart enough to con a jury the same way he conned his co-defendant.
And that gamble means a trial is scheduled for February 2026. The specific charges he is facing are coercion and conspiracy in connection with Grace Jennings' murder. It's vital to note he isn't charged with the physical act of stabbing her. He is charged with engineering the environment and the psychology that led to the stabbing.
And this upcoming trial is carrying immense weight. It is being watched closely not just by the family of Grace Jennings, who are desperate for final accountability, but by the legal community across the country.
It has drawn significant national media attention. Networks like Court TV have already named it as one of their highly anticipated cases of 2026. Because it isn't just a standard murder trial, it is a trial that fundamentally questions the modern definition of a weapon. I want to ask you to evaluate the prosecution's strategy here. They're going all in on the digital premeditation. Are they taking a risk by prosecuting the guy who didn't hold the sword?
This raises an important question. It's a calculated necessity, and it raises a vital question about the evolution of criminal law in the digital age. For a very long time, the justice system struggled to adequately punish the manipulators.
Right, because it's invisible.
The law is very good at punishing the hand that strikes, but it has historically been weak at punishing the people who keep their hands physically clean while coercing, threatening, or forcing others to do their dirty work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The progressive shift we are seeing here, particularly in how the New Mexico prosecutors are handling this indictment, is profound. They are arguing that the psychological architect, the person who weaponizes another human being through systemic coercive control, shared delusion, and digital commands, is legally and morally just as culpable as the hand holding the blade.
They are looking at a jury and saying that Isaac Apodaca's text messages are legally equivalent to the physical swings of that metal sword.
Precisely. If the prosecution succeeds in 2026, it sets a massive, reverberating legal precedent. It legally codifies that coercive control and digital conspiracy are not just lesser secondary crimes or aggravating factors.
They are the crime.
They are the foundational architecture of the murder itself. It tells abusers that outsourcing the physical violence will no longer protect them from the ultimate penalty.
And so we wait for February 2026 to see if a jury of his peers will look at those texts and hold the puppet master fully accountable for the total destruction caused by his puppet.
It really is a landmark case.
It is a deeply tragic, incredibly dark story that challenges everything we think we know about how violence operates. To bring this deep dive back to you, the listener, what we have explored today is the fatal, catastrophic intersection of severe psychopathology, the undeniable, gruesome physical forensics of a medieval weapon, and the cold, unalterable reality of digital premeditation.
That exact combination is what makes it so terrifying.
That specific matrix of horrors is what took the life of a vibrant 21-year-old woman named Grace Jennings.
It is a case where the boundaries of human manipulation and cruelty were pushed to their absolute psychological limits, resulting in a completely unimaginable, preventable loss for a family and a community.
And it leaves you with a final thought that is genuinely hard to shake as you go about your day. Think about your own habits. We hold our smartphones in our hands every single day. We look at them constantly. We think of them simply as communication devices, benign tools we use to stay connected with friends, order food, or check the news. But in the eyes of modern forensics, and in the profound legal precedent being fought for in this very trial, a text message can be legally viewed, prosecuted, and punished as a murder weapon.
That is a staggering thought.
Consider your own digital footprint and the immense power of the words you casually type into the ether, because the justice system is rapidly catching up to technology. The law is no longer differentiating between the physical violence of a swung sword and the silent digital keystrokes that command it to swing. The invisible strings of control are visible now. They are recorded in server logs and text threads.
And as we will see in 2026, those digital strings are proving to be strong enough to bind someone to a 30-year sentence, or perhaps soon, a definitive conspiracy conviction that locks the puppet master away for good.
We started this deep dive by talking about the shattered logic of a crime scene. We look for a straight line from motive to action. But sometimes, as Santa Fe learned in the most painful way possible, the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the 3-foot sword covered in blood on the floor. It's the silent, glowing screen in the corner, dictating exactly where that sword should swing. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the evidence. We'll be back with another deep dive into the sources soon.